Hello everyone, Floppy Waffle 69 here, and welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we will be starting a brand new Down the Line series. I haven't done these in about a month, and we are on to battleships. And I was thinking about what Down the Line series to really get into and start discussing. And to me, it came down to two. One of them started at tier 8 and went to tier 10, and the other one starts at tier 3 and goes down to tier 10. But of the two battleship lines, I figured I would do the Italian battleships. And the main reason why I wanted to touch on this is because the current state of the meta, especially at tier 10, where everyone is screaming about how broken and overpowered the Cristoforo Colombo is. So I figured I would start and go down this line all the way to the Cristoforo Colombo, talk about each specific ship other than just the Colombo, because sometimes I think we get too lost in tier 10 and high tier gameplay that we forget about the lower tiers to medium tiers of this game, and kind of see what this battleship line's all about. And that's my job here for you, is to not only go into each individual ship, tell you how to potentially set up and build each specific ship, but how to make each ship work and do well. And also, on the contrary, how to take each of these ships down. Now, we will start at tier 5 like I always do with every Down the Line series. Of course, the only mitigating factor to that or exception would be is if the line doesn't start or have a tier 5 and it starts somewhere else, okay? Like the other battleship line that I almost did, which would have been the Libertad, which starts at tier 8. And you come over at tier 7 from the cruiser line. But enough about that. We are on to the Italian battleships, and this is the Cavour, the tier 5 Italian battleship. Now let me get this off my chest right off the get-go. I actually really like this ship. I think it is a lot of fun, but it requires a little bit more game knowledge. And what do I mean by that? Well, you have to understand who you're fighting and how semi-armor piercing works, okay? For starters, you have to know what ships have thickness, armor thresholds that exceed the ability of your penetration capabilities of your semi-armor piercing. That is the big thing. I think good players stick with SAP, but phenomenal players that know the game will switch between the two ammunition types, both ammunition types being semi-armor piercing and armor piercing. There is no high explosives on this vessel, which is a bit of a downside if you look at it from like damage over time perspectives and ships that are bow tanking you. Yes, that can get frustrating to deal with, but if you have, let's just say, 16 guns and you use a legendary mod and can pinpoint superstructures, I really don't think it comes down to a, I don't think we're going to be splitting hairs here talking about, you know, if it's balanced or whatnot, because I think you'll be fine, is what I'm trying to say, okay? But we're not at tier 10, we're at tier 5, and the Cavour really does get the job done, especially for who you will be fighting. Now, as you know, tier 5 is a bit of a pivotal point in the game. And I talk about this in all my Down the Line series, and this one being no exception. The tier 5 is when you actually lose protected matchmaking. Protected matchmaking means you can only get up 1 and -1 on the, like in the tier differentials. So now you can theoretically see +2. So tier 5s usually get kind of fucked over and have to fight a lot of tier 7 ships. Usually. Every now and then you do get lucky enough and roll double 6s and you are actually top tier, or you only get up tiered once. But sadly, with the state of the game and with how everything is and how everything's set up, you do find yourself running into tier 7s quite a bit, which would be a bit of a problem. But you do have a few tricks up your sleeve, and that is the semi-armor piercing, and that is pretty damn good. Some people would even go as far as saying how semi-armor piercing is blatantly broken and overpowered on battleships. And you know, actually, I would tend to agree for the most part. I do think once you start exceeding gun calibers, semi-armor piercing really does become stronger and stronger and stronger until it completely throws balance out the window. Now, I'm not going to sit here and defend semi-armor piercing of the 152 and the 203 variants. I think those are, slightly not as bad, but I think they're still bad to some degree. I would like to see personally maybe one more negative on semi-armor piercing. I know, remember, it can't ricochet, it can only shatter or penetrate. I would like to see another rule be thrown in there, maybe to help balance it out just a little bit more than it is currently. But again, I'm not a game developer. I don't do that. I just want to showcase the ships, talk about them, and start a discussion, and help any and all players that I can possibly help in this game, because I feel like there's a lot of YouTubers, community contributors out there that are there about self-promotion and highlighting themselves and maybe informing on the latest and greatest ships, but not really going back and helping, teach. I don't want to say teach, because I guess we're going to call it teaching, help teach a little bit, and kind of help players really improve their game so that we all can enjoy the game a little bit more and get better results. That, I think, is the big thing. Instead, they're easy just to, say well done in chat and report you and blacklist you and all that kind of stuff. And I understand there's a time and a place for that too, but at the same time, why would we want to chase away people who are theoretically starting this game off and theoretically also going to be spending money on this game right in the beginning? I don't think that's really smart from a business side of things anyway. But anyways, like I do with all these down the line series, I'm going to dig deep within the stats of the ship. And then after that, I'm going to talk and go over some tips and tricks in her, how to set her up. And then I'm going to go ahead and follow up with some gameplay of the ship in question here, which is the Tier 5 Cavour. So let's go ahead and look at the armor layout. Now, Tier 5 and kind of these Dreadnought style era of ships are kind of tricky, because we look at these armor layouts, and if you know the rules in the game about, what can overmatch 32 millimeters of armor, which is 460 millimeter guns and higher, 380 millimeters can overmatch 25, but they can't overmatch 27, but 406s can overmatch 27, and all these rules, we kind of get more lost in that towards middle to higher tiers, but in lower tiers, we kind of forget about how insanely armored these ships are. For starters, 85 millimeter fore-end armor belt, essentially almost like an icebreaker, I like to say. Not really, but almost. I mean, the Yamato can't even overmatch that, guys, just to give you kind of a glimpse on how insanely high these armor values are. Not to that, coupled with a upper belt of 130 millimeters, and then a lower armor belt or a main armor belt of 220, coming in with kind of a weird deck layout, as these Dreadnought style ships are, with kind of like a 30, 19, and 43, which is really great for shattering high explosives, especially from cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers, and depending on the battleship gun caliber as well. And then we have a massive aft end deck armor rating of 19 millimeter as well. We go ahead and strip away the armor layout of the vessel, and we do see that the ship does have a citadel that could theoretically be hit, because it is sitting waterline or slightly above, which is only around 40 millimeters of armored deck slopes, which are slightly sloped. Again, these are Dreadnought style of ships. These things are just floating barges ready to battle. These are battle wagons, right? And again, battleships and destroyers really do dominate lower tiers. I really feel bad for the cruisers, because they just get shit on by anyone. Destroyers can citadel you, battleships can nuke you and one-shot you. It's really not good for the cruiser at lower tiers. And yes, you gain more power as you climb up the tiers, but that problem never really alleviates. There are some destroyers that can still citadel you, and then there are still battleships that can one-shot you and completely rid you off the map and the battle completely and send you back to port. Going into the survivability, you're coming in at 38,700 with only a 15% torpedo protection or damage reduction. That's really not that good, guys, especially for these Dreadnought style era of ships. You don't want to be eating torpedoes, but theoretically, where you're playing the ship anyways, I really wouldn't concern yourself with eating too many torpedoes, okay? Artillery, got the 2x2 305 and the 3x3 305. This is a wonky little turret setup here. We have 2 up front, 2 in the ass, and we have 1 middle. This is pretty common with these Dreadnought style of ships. That middle turret is going to be a bit of a hassle to get to bearing. You are going to have to show a bit of a broadside or a fair amount of broadsiding profile in order to get that turret in the works and on target. But again, you have a lot of armor, and you just really have to time your shots, and you should be fine. There should be no problem with that. You do have quite an impressive secondary battery of 18 times 1 120s. The only problem with this is that there is extremely short range at only 4.5 kilometers. So if you find yourself within that of a ship, hopefully it's a ship that your HE can penetrate, which is 20 millimeters, which isn't much other than destroyers and the occasional cruisers, depending on the plating and where it's hitting. Okay. Don't spec into them. Not that I think you would. I'm just saying it's really not worth it. Unless you want to meme around and fuck around, not really worth it, okay? But the main battery is the bread and butter through the Italian battleship line, as it should be for every battleship line. It is your main damage dealers. I have talked about this. Even if you are a secondary battleship-focused, battleship line or battleship, your main damage dealers are still going to be your main artillery. Secondary should always be a secondary thought or an afterthought, as they are going to complement and supplement your main artillery. That's kind of how I go about thinking about, battleships in general, and secondaries too. Like I already mentioned, the reload time, then you're going to have a minimum shell type switching time of 20 seconds. Now, this is quite interesting. This, I think, is the Italian's battleship. One of the little gimmicks that are thrown into the Italian BBs is that they kind of have it baked in. Like, expert loader is kind of baked in, not as good, but still pretty damn good. So you are going to have a little bit of improved shell switching time, though I still recommend you do take, again, if you have a 21-point commander on these ships, I'm kind of just trying to help you out and, like, building upon this so that when you get to the Colombo, you theoretically, if you so choose, you could just bring that same commander all the way up, and it should be viable all the way up to the Cristoforo Colombo if you so choose. Again, that's just generically speaking. I still try to build the commander for the ship because that's how I play the game. But again, I'm also trying to acknowledge that some players do carry their commander up. 180-degree turn time is 36 seconds, and the maximum range is being 16.1. Now, I do need to talk about the main battery because this is a big flaw to this line and its entirety, okay? The guns. Very inaccurate, very shotgunny, very wonky dispersion you will get on these guns. They are not consistent. Matter of fact, the only thing consistent about these Italian battleships is the inconsistency of the guns. Okay, let me just put it to you like that. Don't rely on the main battery. It is really much a crap shoot because you're trading so much to pick up the semi-armor piercing. And that's what I really want to stress about this line. The Italian battleship line, in a nutshell, gives up a lot. Guys, in order to pick up that ammunition type, which I think is kind of a balancing factor, or what Wargaming thought as a balancing factor when they put semi-armor piercing with such high gun caliber on, the Italian battleship in general, when they fabricated it. The only problem to that is that is just a general rule of thumb. If you're a Unicom player, you're still going to be able to make this thing work. If you're a good player, you're still going to be able to make this thing work. It shouldn't really be that big of a deal. You're just going to position yourself in pre-kited positions, know how to angle your armor, which is actually quite good on this ship and the Italian BB line in general. It really shouldn't be that big of a downside. Just going to put that, get that off my chest around the beginning. But talking about the artillery, semi-armor piercing shells, base damage of 7450. Semi-armor piercing shells are always going to be higher alpha potential, or just higher alpha in general. That's, again, what Wargaming thought was a good idea. So they're just going to be a higher generalized damage, okay? It's not uncommon to hit, especially on this ship, like theoretically 2 shells and do anywhere between 7 to 10k. I've seen it, especially when you go in the higher tiers with 381 millimeters of gun caliber. Maybe not per se on this ship, but especially when you pick up the 380 guns, hitting 2 shells, you could still do 8, 9, 10k. I've seen it. It's crazy. Really, really is crazy. Okay, again, the semi-armor piercing on the Cavour can only penetrate 79 millimeters, and that is a very important number, and make sure you have that baked into the back of your mind, because this means there are some battleships that this thing can absolutely shit on, and there are some battleships that this thing absolutely cannot shit on with its semi-armor piercing. So you need to be familiar with the values of the ships you're shooting at. I find semi-armor piercing at lower tiers to medium tiers with the Italian battleships, okay, not as strong at all as you will get when you start getting to the upper tiers. And that just comes down to the armor of the ships you're fighting. Now, yes, you're still going to shit on cruisers. Theoretically, you're still going to shit on destroyers. But battleships, because we're in this dreadnought era, with how high of armor value that these ships have, the semi-armor piercing on enemy battleships are not as effective as you're going to see on middle to upper tiers. That is important. Okay, going to the armor piercing, 77-100 with initial shell velocity of 840 compared to the SAP of 850. Now, I want to point out, I did just say semi-armor piercing is usually higher alpha strike. I'm assuming down here at lower tiers, again, this is a balancing feature. It's not. This will get reversed once you get, I think, to the tier 7. I believe the semi-armor piercing takes the cake for the higher alpha strike potential. It's just going to be a higher damaging round. Okay, that's why you see a lot of players stick with it. Plus, it's just easy mode. Okay, especially when you get to those tiers. But down here, it's going to take a little bit switching back and forth. And I think that's why Wargaming intended to do to some degree, is they wanted to make sure that players didn't just spam semi-armor piercing with their Italian battleships. They really wanted you to switch back and forth. They encouraged it with the minimum shell switching time as well. But that was kind of an afterthought. I don't know if that got released with the line. I thought that was a later buff that they added, maybe like 6 months after release. But then again, you see a lot of players, all they do is they stick with semi-armor piercing. But then again, I've already talked about it. When you get to the upper tiers, it just becomes the easier and way superior choice. People just want consistency, and semi-armor piercing is going to deliver that with its damage when it lands on the target. But again, that is the trick question in there, the caveat, so to speak, is if it lands on the target. And really, I hate to be honest with you guys, you're really not going to find that consistency until you get to the tier 10. And that's kind of what I want to highlight with these ships. I don't think the Italian BBs are bad by any means, but I think they really do get shafted by a lot of the players because they're just so used to that consistency meta that they're getting at top tier. So when they go back or they grind these ships, or even to other battleship lines, these really feel lackluster. Moving into, I don't really want to talk about the airstrikes. That's clearly obvious. They have airstrikes. Their battleship A defense is dog water. You're really not going to be able to do too much with this, so don't count on it because it has to get typical Italian 4.6 maximum range. Maneuverability, it's not terrible. Really, it's not terrible. It's kind of like they're in the middle of the pack. It feels right at home for many battleship commanders, especially when you get to like middle to high tier. It feels fine. Really no concerns on that regard. And then with the concealment value, I think stock you have 12.8, and then with the commander build you get it down to like 11 point whatever, which again is awesome, and I highly recommend that, especially at lower tier, because concealment is huge. Again, it can get voided with aircraft carriers, but again, it's just, you might as well take it. It's a 4-point scale, and it's really going to help you down here at lower tiers. Let's go ahead and look at the upgrades real quick. So for the upgrades, okay, there's only 3 slots, and again, they're the standard 3 upgrades you're going to take. Main armaments mod 1, first slot. Second slot, damage control systems modification 2, and in the third slot, aiming systems modification 1. This is a necessity and a must. You have to take your aiming systems modification 1. Now, I do want to mention, because this is the tier 5 in the line, there are some important things that you need to know about the Italian battleships, okay? And there's 2 of them that I want to really highlight. Okay, and why, again, so many players are gravitating towards this. As you know, armor piercing, and I believe it transfers over to semi-armor piercing as well, battleships will only do 10% of their maximum shell damage to destroyers. Obviously, that's going to switch with high explosive, but only AP and SAP. Like I said, you're only going to be able to get 10% of your maximum shell damage on target, and that applies to DDs. That's what I'm talking about. Is it applying to destroyers? Again, because semi-armor piercing is just sitting higher, you're going to be doing more damage with semi-armor piercing. That's why a lot of players do that. Also, with submarines, if there is one style of ships or ships in general that can really nuke enemy submarines, it's the Cristoforo Colombo and all that. It's notorious for one-shotting tier 10 submarines, and since tier 10 or just submarines in general are so despised by the community, people really do love that. I know you've seen a lot of famous YouTubers probably reposting shorts or gameplay footage of them doing that. It is just a thing. So I think that's also another reason why these ships are so popular, because they can absolutely shit on ships that usually shit on them, is kind of what I'm trying to say here. It's very, very powerful tool, right? And then lastly, another thing that these ships will pick up, not at this tier, they do, I believe it's at tier 8 with the Littorio, they will pick up, or sorry, the Veneto, they will pick up the fuel exhaust smoke like the cruisers. In my honest and humble opinion, these ships don't need it. I think they could have done without the stupid exhaust smoke generator on these ships. I think, if anything, I see a metric fuck ton of Italian battleship players use their smoke screens wrong, and I will make sure to highlight what I believe or how I believe those smoke screens to be utilized when we'll cross that bridge essentially when it comes up. I don't really want to talk about it too much now, but I want to get this off my chest here first because this is the Tier 5, and the Tier 5 analysis is usually a bit longer because it usually kickstarts the Down the Line series, and I want to make sure that I'm crossing and basically having all my ducks in a row and touch base on everything before I put this video out. But anyways, guys, that is the upgrades and that is the ship and its port analysis. So let's go ahead and check out some gameplay footage in this bitch. Alrighty, and here we are in battle with our Tier 5 Italian battleship. I will go ahead and flash up the commander build and the corresponding upgrades that I've already covered. Just as a refresher, I know a lot of you like that, so I'll go ahead and constantly do that as just a reminder. And if you are fortunate enough, or just you are a sweaty tryhard, you love this ship to death, and you've managed to get a 21-point commander, boom, this is what I will recommend up there. Pretty damn standard build, pretty self-explanatory what I'm doing for. There's really not too many choices. You're just going for a standard tank build because really nothing you can do that can help min-max your semi-armor piercing. Thank God, okay? But anyways, battleships come down to positioning and to patience, I think. And I think this initial clip is going to showcase what I am talking about with the enemy Phoenix. I wait until he starts making his maneuver, and I will go ahead and I will open up with my semi-armor piercing, and I land right at his citadel, knowing that I can citadel him with my 79 millimeters of effective sap penetration. Again, knowing the targets that you're shooting at, because I know his armor threshold, and he's very lightly armored scout cruiser, light cruiser, so to speak, I know that I can absolutely dummy him with my semi-armor piercing, and that's really what this sap does so damn effectively at not only lower tiers, but top tiers as well. The only difference is once you get those larger caliber guns, your penetration values will go up even higher, meaning that you really can start doing that consistently throughout, the course of shooting at any ships, right? Throughout the course of the entire grind. Citadeling, you're only going to be able to really citadel the super light cruisers, so like the Minotaur, Smolensk, Cavour, those kind of ships, but not until you get access to the 406s. On the Giuseppe, I believe, has a, and then so does the Marco Polo. Then you can citadel some other ships. And then also when you get to the Loria, if you decide to get that ship for steel, that ship can citadel other ships as well, as it has 457 millimeter sap. Yikes. And it doesn't become any less broken either. Let me just put that out there too. Like, I think semi-armor piercing in its own right isn't like that completely fair of an ammunition choice. But then again, I guess the same argument could be made with, Conqueror HE every 26 seconds at 23, 24 kilometers, or Thunder HE. But I don't know, something about the damage you can still get, it just a lot. It's one of those things that's like, well, like, pick a side here kind of thing, right? So I understand the frustration. I do think semi-armor piercing is a little bit too strong in my opinion, and I would love to see like another thing be added as a con to it. But again, I doubt we'll ever see that. I guess Wargaming thinks it's balanced, so, fuck it, right? But anyway, talking about this ship in particular, I've already kind of talked about the line, so to speak, kind of what to expect as you're going to slowly start tracking your way up towards the Colombo. But what about this specific ship in general? Well, what I found with this ship really likes the medium range. I think its armor scheme, if angled correctly, is actually freaking phenomenal, and you're going to see some examples of that later on in the battle. I really do like the package here, and because you have the amount of guns that you do, you have the 3x3 and the 2x2 for the guns. You do have a fair amount of guns on this ship, which translates to what was it 10 shells that go down range. Like it's a fair amount, and it actually translates to a lot of hits for you. That's one thing I have. You kind of know this about me, and I mentioned this on my channel. I always am more of a fan of battleships that have more shell count than have fewer, just because more shells flying through the air usually means more shells landing on target, and usually going where you want them to go. Because like for the Colombo, like how can you miss with 16 shells, right? That's kind of like my whole thought process with it. But yeah, but that's one thing with the Italians. You do have quite a bit, but you do get that wonky dispersion. So once you start exceeding, especially in like this ship past 13 kilometers, you're really going to notice that you're only landing maybe like sub 4 to 5 shells on target out of your 10 or 12 or whatever you have. It really will start to become a bit of a struggle, right? But anyways, yeah. But the 12 shells you do pick up on this ship are quite nice, and I have noticed that. Again, it's nothing out of the ordinary. Most battleships do have either anywhere between 10 to 12 shells going down range. Also, I led this guy just a little bit too much. Again, yes, some of them are bots. I want to point that out. But again, it's not my problem that Wargaming can't get a lot of players here at low tier. I understand it. Medium to higher tiers are just more fun. There's a lot more like historic kind of shit. Well, I don't want to say that because that's actually not necessarily true. But maybe some more iconic ships that people want to play. So I guess they want to rush through these lower tiers just to get to upper, higher tiers, which again is not good because we see a lot of players getting to higher tiers that really don't belong there. And it really kind of makes us all sad because, I mean, I want them to play the game. I want them to have fun doing it, but like they're not really doing themselves any favor by flying through these bottom tiers, skipping tiers, that kind of stuff. I will always recommend that you never skip a boat. You should always try to at least play that ship a couple times and then come to the conclusion like, hey, this ship is just not for me. I got to get past this thing, because each ship does teach you something along the way, but it's up to you as the player to learn from each tier and then try to apply what you've learned to the next tier until you get eventually to the tier 10 when everything is supposed to jive and come together. Again, your semi-armor piercing is nice. I believe your DPM for armor piercing is coming in at 210 and semi-armor piercing is about 203. Again, DPM is less important for battleships because they are more damage per salvo rather than, damage per second kind of thing. DPM usually translates more towards the cruiser especially and the destroyer here and there rather than the battleship. There are a couple battleship exceptions, looking at you, Irresistible, Illinois, that actually are more DPM focused. But yeah, I would say that 90% of the BBs in the game pretty much aren't. So really don't pay too much mind to those values. But since there's such a big strength of these Italian BBs come in the form of their semi-armor piercing shell, it is worth talking about kind of some general rule of thumbs where you want to be aiming no matter what, unless you know that you're, like in this case, 79 millimeters of effective penetration. Unless you know you can absolutely nuke the ship with the Citadel, you should always try to be aim upper, like upper belt and like where the superstructure meets the deck. That's kind of the sweet spot because that is very penetrable, lightly armored or lighter armored areas or surface areas of the ship, which is going to translate to more penetrations, which is going to translate to more damage. What you don't want to do is on these battleships aim waterline, shatter on their belt armor, and do 0 damage because in my opinion that is a wasted salvo, and it's just not worth it at that point. So understanding where you want to land your shells and where to aim is crucial when you're playing ships like this. And remember, we have no damage over time. We can't set fires or anything. So if you just do no damage, that's just 0 damage done, and you're not necessarily out trading or trading at all with the enemy. And that, I think, is why HE is still considered the superior choice, because not only can HE do a little bit of chip damage here and there, and then, battleships, they can do a lot of damage. We've all been nuked by Thunderers and Conquerors, right? But also they can set 1, 2, 3 fires on target, which is scary in its own right, because usually what are we trying to do? After 2 fires, you pop your damage control party. That lasts for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then the Conqueror follows up with another salvo, and boom, there's 2 more fires on target. Incredibly infuriating. But it is a thing in this game. It is strategy, right? So I guess the strategy to apply here is going into that medium range where you can more consistently land more shells on target, and then where to aim as well. But knowing when to shoot semi-armor piercing and AP is the big thing with these ships, and that is something that I want to kind of stress to you. Do not just sit with semi-armor piercing, because I think it's kind of a bad mindset to get into. There have been plenty of salvos that semi-armor piercing has just let me down, and especially at these lower tiers, the battleship's armor schemes are just too high, especially these dreadnought era of ships, that you're actually just not going to get penetrations at all, and you're going to do 0 damage. And I think that's why a lot of players just don't do too well with these ships. Plus, they play further in the back, and they're not necessarily doing that much damage. So it's kind of this like hodgepodge of doing zero damage, but I'm landing shells on target and they're not very accurate because I'm playing at 15, 16 kilometers with my Cavour. I hate the ship. The ship's ass. Let me go to the next tier. That's kind of the thought process that a lot of these Italian battleship commanders have until they get to where, the higher tiers where they pick up the 380s and they have a lot of shells. So now things are working out. Oh, these ships are great. I think it's one of those things that the community really didn't know what they were asking for, because you can't pick up a powerful shell type like this and expect you to land, 16 out of 16 shells on target like the Colombo. And I think that's why we're in a bad state. I'm not going to sit here and trash YouTubers. That's not what I do, but I feel there are a lot of influential YouTubers and community contributors and people that have, Wargaming's attention that said the Colombo was weak, the Colombo needs help, and they went ahead and they overbuffed the ship. And now we're in a state where we have the Colombo as strong as we currently have. And I think this just goes to show you that I think Wargaming listens. I just think they listen to everybody, which at the same time, everyone is now saying the ship is broken. So hopefully it's just a matter of time until they eventually rein in the Christopher Colombo, because it is insanely overpowered, in my opinion. It is. I mean, when you see 3 Colombos, on either side every game, it's like, what the hell? And I think it's probably rivaling, especially on the NA server, like your typical bread and butter ships like the Montana, which is very popular because it's on the NA server and people want to play American ships, right? So it makes sense why that ship would be popular. So why we're seeing 3 Colombos per side, probably, I mean, we're not in Italy, and we're not in Europe, so to me, it comes down to it's easy to play and it's incredibly strong, right? It really is running the meta right now. Okay, going into my final thoughts about the ship. I already talked about ammo switching. Don't just stick with semi-armor piercing. Flip between the two. 2, understanding who you're fighting and armor values and how much penetration your guns have on its sap, because this is going to be a huge decision whether or not, which shell type you should be using in certain situations. Okay. Number 3, you don't want to be towards the back of the map. I'm talking especially with this ship that has a maximum range of 16.1. You don't want to be 14, 15, 16 kilometers unless you are forced in those bad situations. You want to be anywhere between that 11 to 13 kilometer range. I think that's the sweet spot for this ship. If you go in too close, people are more inclined to show their entire broadside, to get their entire broadside to bear, which I think is going to make them susceptible to taking massive chunks of damage, which is what you don't want to do. I am going to showcase here at the end of the game how great the armor scheme is here on the tier 5 if you angle your shell or ship properly. And I guess if you're going against a player that really doesn't know where to aim and they're constantly shooting the armor belt at a 30 degree or 40 degree angle, which is only going to translate to little to no damage at all, especially when shooting armor piercing. I think the last thing I have with this, so I've touched on a lot. I know I'm just kind of throwing a lot of information at you guys, but the one thing I really want to stress with these ships is don't get overconfident with your semi-armor piercing. Playing these ships, I guess, 3 through 9, because it's not going to bode well for you. You also want to keep people guessing. I think Citadel damage, you can only repair 10% of Citadel damage with standard heals. There are some heals that can repair more. So if you could take full advantage of that, I believe semi-armor piercing with pen damage can still be repaired. Is it 50% and HE is 100% of the time? Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But again, if I can only have that ship repair 10% of a double Citadel, that is huge for me and swaying the battle in my favor. Don't just stick with the semi-armor piercing, okay? And no matter how easy as that makes it sound, you see those massive damaging shots, it should be split, okay? Not 50-50. I think semi-armor piercing needs to be shot maybe around 70% of the time to AP around 30% of the time. But here at low tiers, I would say it's 50-50. This really doesn't change, in my opinion, until you get to tier 7. And I'll make sure to highlight that too. Tier 7 is the first tier where I would do more 70-30 rather than 50-50. But here for the tier 5 and the tier 6 especially, I know I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but I'm here to help you guys. Shoot 50-50. Because then you can take full advantage of a lot of ships, not just with semi-armor piercing, which I know my sap can penetrate here on the New York, but also because I can hopefully get Citadels and void those massive armor platings that a lot of these dreadnought style of ships have. Cruisers and destroyers, though, hey, it's all game. It's all fair game. You know, your semi-armor piercing should still be able to citadel the vast majority of cruisers, so I would still stick with SAP almost exclusively. Again, though, it comes down to you and what you feel is the appropriate ammunition choice, but those are just some of the rules that I have fabricated and that I utilize for myself when I play these ships. So, and lastly, guys, this is a great ship. I think this is a great introduction to the line, especially with the rules that I have set forth in front of you. If you can apply these rules when you play these ships, I think that a lot of people have disregarded and kind of put these ships aside. But I think it can give like a breath of new life to you when you play these ships now. And if you apply these rules, I think you're going to find yourself doing more and more damage and surviving more and more battles and being more impactful rather than just spamming sap, which is what so many players want you to do nowadays. Just rotate and position your ship accordingly and have patience and let those broadsides present themselves to you. Okay. Anyways, guys, I will leave you on the post-battle screen. Thank you so much for watching. You all are awesome. Stay tuned for more. I'll be doing my best to trickle out content to all you fine folks. Have a good one, guys, and peace out.